streaming again. All right, see you.
Got it.
All right, we're good
You
now.
want to say something, Mr. Hawkins? Just make sure.
We good here?
Got it. Got it.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, we're good.
We're ready?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to call to order this specially called meeting of the Woodford County Board of Education. I'll call the roll. Is Allison here? Yes, I see you. Okay, let the record show that all members are present. Before we begin, I want to make a quick announcement. I want to remind everyone that your comments on Google Meet can be seen by everyone. So please keep that in mind and be courteous during the meeting. Also, we have our architect, attorney, and bonding agent with us tonight. I ask that all board members and staff treat them with respect. It is clear that our differences on issues, particularly surrounding the new high school, have devolved into dissension among the board members and Mr. Hawkins. This has led to strong and contentious discussion among us, and unfortunately has led to personal attacks and unfounded allegations. But we cannot let this behavior bleed over into our working relationships with our outside partners, whether it be an attorney or the company who takes our school pictures. They have shown great grace, professionalism, patience, flexibility, and expertise in their interactions with us. They deserve the same respect and civility from us in both private contact and during public meetings. I would also request that we keep our discussions to the specific agenda topic and refrain from repetitious remarks. Okay. So our first thing is a presentation by the architect, Mr. Locke.
Can you see me?
Yes.
I can.
Okay, great, and you can hear me. I'm going to share my screen if that's all right, and hopefully, Bob, that works out.
Yes, okay.
Let me know when you can see that.
Yeah, we got it now. Yep.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, everybody. I really do appreciate this. This is an opportunity I think that is a little bit overdue as far as being able to discuss the high school in an open, honest fashion and go over some of the options and where the project is right now, and hopefully get some direction moving forward as to basically what the board wants to do and how the district wants to move forward. So previous to this meeting, I sent out 3 different options, and option 1 is basically the full high school build out. When I say full high school build out, I'm talking about a high school for 1350. Also included in that is associated site work. It does not include a football field or any of the other sports venues that are currently used over at Falling Springs, but it is for the complete high school of 1350. And there are some alternates attached to that as well that we'll talk about in a little bit. Option number 2 is taking a look and seeing if there's any way to give the board a little bit more flexibility as far as financial considerations, because I know we've been struggling with that for some time. And so the idea there was that taking a look at building a academic wing, academic component of the high school for 1,000 students, and then all of the core spaces, that would be the kitchen, the cafeteria, the media center, administration, things like that, for 1350. And there would be an alternate in that option number 2 to build out the classroom wing to make it similar to option number 1. But this gives the district a lot more capacity or flexibility as far as the estimated cost opinion for that particular project. And we'll, let me see here. So that's option number 2. That was showing that information. This area right in here, if you can see my cursor, that is that academic wing build out. area as well. So the third option that we were talking about, and that we gave you a presentation, a preliminary presentation on, is how would you renovate the existing high school? And this just shows the multi-phased approach that would probably be best in approaching that particular option. So those were the three options, and I thought we might go into a little bit more detail, starting with option one. And if anybody, feel free to interrupt and ask questions. One of the things I would like to preface this conversation with is our firm has approximately a $20 million high school project bidding tomorrow down in Bowling Green. And some recent information here as far as a high school that was bid in Lexington for Tates Creek High School. That project it's about 350,000 square feet. It's a high school for approximately 2,000 students. Out of that 350,000 square feet, about 50,000 square feet is a basement that is being used as a storm shelter. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison. But that project had two bidders, and in talking to the successful bidder about the bid environment right now, they said that basically there was a lot of contractors that were very interested in basically having the security of a large project that was going to keep them busy for a long period of time. And then also they were very much interested in, committing to a project, and that caused a lot of competition, a lot of pencil sharpening. That project came in approximately 10% under the estimate. That project, if you look at it, again, it's not an apples to apples comparison, but it came in, base bid on that project was about $190 a square foot. So with all the alternates in it, it came in slightly under $200 a square foot. Again, not an apples to apples comparison because of the basement, but it is here in Lexington. It is the largest project that's bid recently. I will say that that particular project had some unique features to it, with the basement and the storm shelter, but it is about as close as we can get to where we anticipate things going. And just to give you a reference point for that $200 a square foot, currently, after our design team and construction manager completed our design development cost estimate, we came up with a cost estimate that was roughly $240 construction cost per square foot. So those are the numbers that you are going to be seeing on the screen as I show the different options. So up at the top, we talk about the construction cost versus the total project cost. And just to give everybody a kind of a rough feel for where that is, the construction cost is a certain number, and that's kind of what the architects and the CMs deal with. Owners like to know what the whole project is going to cost, the total project cost. That's typically on this project somewhere around 20 to 21% over, and that's for the soft costs that I think that we clarified in the past. Before I move forward, are there any questions on anything I've talked about so far?
Yes. So the $200 square foot cost for Tates Creek does or does not, is it a total project cost?
No, that's construction cost.
Okay.
But that $200, that is including all the alternates in the project, and that compares directly to our $240 a square foot number that we're currently showing in our design development cost estimate or cost opinion.
Okay.
Do you know how they're funding that, the new Tates Creek School in Lexington?
The new school in Lexington? I'm sorry.
Right, I'm sorry, the one you were just talking about. I assume it's the Tates Creek one, the new Tates Creek one.
Yeah, I don't have all the funding information on that. I have not seen all the revised BG1 page 2 on those things.
Kelly, I think, is on here. She may have that information.
Sorry, trying to take myself off mute. How are you all this evening? I can pull up the BG1, but a significant portion is from restricted fund bonding. There is a general fund cash contribution, and then Fayette County does a lot of construction projects, so they're actually using quite a bit of residual cash from previous projects where they've closed them out and had excess money. You put in about a contingency of 5 to 10% in projects. If that's not needed, I think, and I can give you the exact number, but I want to think there's close to 11 million of cash put towards the project. And then part of it's from general fund, part of it's from residual, and then the difference is from bonding. Does that help, Ms. Springfield?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Yes, that does help. I just kind of wanted to see, it sounds like they have their funding sources in place and they know, what they can afford, and maybe even have a little bit, it sounds like, backup cash in case, they decide to change things or add, or, the bids end up coming in higher or the work comes in higher, that sort of thing. I was just curious.
Is that a document that you could send us?
I think it's a public, obviously it's uploaded in Katie's backpack, but I'd obviously just like to talk to Fayette County if that's okay.
Sure. No, I didn't know if it was a public document or not.
I think it is. It's in the backpack system, so it's been approved by Katie. So you know what it is, a public document that's approved at their board meeting. So I'm sure that's something we can
I'm sorry, I missed that last part, Kelly.
It was approved at their board meeting, so it is a public, a revised BG1 is approved at the board meeting, so it is a public document.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank
you. Definitely share.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to preface the conversation with is that we came up with some value engineering ideas that was between the construction manager and the design team. And that list was provided to the board. We identified approximately $4.5 million construction cost for value engineering items on the project. And so that is not taken into consideration in the numbers that are shown at the top of the options that we're about to go through in detail. And with that, I will go ahead and basically go through option number one in a little bit of detail. So option number one, we are estimating roughly from a construction cost standpoint, roughly $41 million right now, with an additional $8.6 million of soft cost. And that is for the base bid of the project. So you're looking at roughly $49.5 million for the base bid of the project. And when I say base bid, typically we like to do additive alternates, most folks do. And we have listed over there the alternates. There are 4 alternates that are basically taken into consideration at this point in time. Of those 4 alternates there, we have approximately $2 million for the auditorium, $750,000 for a geothermal HVAC system. We also have earmarked about $300,000 for the greenhouse, as well as $650,000 for a track and practice field that would be located where a future football stadium would be located. So total alternates about $3.65 million. Again, if you look at base bid cost of $49.5, if all of the alternates were accepted, you'd be right under $54 million in cost. And again, I always have to say this is an estimate, this is an opinion of probable cost at this stage of the game. This is not a guarantee or anything like that. From a schedule standpoint, one of the things that we're thinking is probably going to be helpful as far as the district and bidding this project is to bid a project in January, February timeframe of next year and get construction started in March. That's when the weather is at its best for starting construction and doing earthwork. Total period of time there for construction, we would look at construction being complete in January of 2023, with classes being able to start in August of 23, or if you wanted to try to improve on that, we would have to talk to the CM. So obviously there's some pros and cons for each one of these options. The first pro for this is it's fully functional high school for 1,350 students. It includes a competition gymnasium. So that's seating for approximately 1,800 students in there. We kind of gave up on the idea of doing an auxiliary gym. It seemed like that was ruffling a lot of feathers, and rightfully so. So that is something that we've shown in here. And we've also shown that in option number 2. That is something that we can talk about in a little bit more detail. So this is science labs and classrooms have been sized a little bit larger than the 1350. The alternates would give you approximately $4.5 million if you look at soft costs included on bid day for the board to make decisions depending on where the bid ended up. This does have the storm shelter included in the music suite, so that is this blue area right in here. So this area right in here, that is the choir room, and then this is the band area. This whole blue area is a storm shelter for appropriately sized for the school. There are some cons. The cost of this, the general fund commitment or some sort of additional levy, we can talk about that. The athletic facilities at nearby Fallen Springs Park and Rec Center would still need to be utilized for this particular option. Any questions on option number 1, or if you want me to go straight into option number 2, I can do that, and then we can open it up to questions, whichever way you want to go.
I have a couple questions, and honestly, it's easier for me to ask them as we go along if you don't mind, so I don't get confused.
Not at all.
So it looks like on option 1, the base bid for almost $50 million is for classrooms for $1,350 and a gym.
Correct.
Okay, and so that would require around $800,000 of general fund and 80% of our capital outlay?
I am not the one to answer that question.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I was looking at your email.
Okay. That was based on the last bonding information that I had gotten from Baird. So I don't know if Millie wants to update that or where that is.
Okay. And then the second $54 million it sounded like the classroom building for $1,350 plus the alternates with the exception of athletic facilities, like you said, and that was around $54 million. And that said it would require a general fund contribution of $950,000 plus 80% of capital outlay. So if Kelly doesn't mind, I had the same question for both.
Yes, ma'am. So I think when you reference, it's easier for me to kind of back into the numbers. So, the bonding capacity with the $950,000 general fund commitment and 80% capital outlay is right around $53 million. So
Okay.
that would be in line with that. And I'm sorry, when you said the second question, I lost your first question. Could you go back to the first?
Yeah, it's the same thing for the bonding capacity of $800,000 general fund and 80% capital outlay.
I don't have the 80%, 800,000 right in front of me. I'll have to pull that up because I'm in front of me the last sheet that I provided on May 6th.
Yeah, I have to say, you were spot on the other one. So the sheet that I got said for the full high school without the athletic facilities was around $54 million that required $950 general fund and 80% capital outlay. So I'm guessing that for the $50 million high school, it's going to be correct saying $800,000 general fund contribution with 80% capital outlay. I'm guessing that number's correct also because the second number was.
I apologize. I don't have that $800,000 right in front of me. I have the 600, the last sheet, so I can try to pull that together.
I think that was me, Ms. Springate, that was me interpolating, and I hopefully I wrote in my email that needed to be confirmed with Baird and all that, but I was just trying to interpolate what would be required for the general fund for option 1 base bid.
Well, I appreciate the information. I mean, I really do, and I like having it, all together. So, my question is, it looks like, according to the email you sent on June 15th, we're somewhere between $8 and $9 million away from being able to afford the full high school if we have the $350,000 general fund commitment. Without that general fund commitment, it looks like we're somewhere between $13 and $14 million away from being able to afford this school. Would that be correct?
That sounds correct. I think the only caveat that what I would make there is that none of the pricing that we have put here at the top of these options takes into consideration any value engineering. That effort that we would do that would obviously save money, and it does not take into effect any bidding environment favorabilities that may come about because of current situation.
Gotcha. I had a quick question just about the finishes. Would the finishes for this price be like a mid-level, a low-level, or like an upper high-end level like we would see at like a Frederick Douglass or a Great Crossings?
I think what we were looking at was a mid-level to not upper level, but mid to high is kind of what we were looking at as far as a finish for this. And you know, when you get into terrazzo corridors and some things like that, obviously we would need to work with the district as to what they want. But obviously, we are looking at a you know, good finishes. They're not going to be top of the line finishes that you would see in some districts, such as, you know, maybe Fayette County that has you know, a little bit more funding capabilities.
And then I just had a question. Your potential cost savings, the email said that I looked at with the list on it, had about $3.5 million. Were you saying earlier that you thought you could find $4.5 million in cost savings?
I think on that list, you'll see that at the bottom right, it was $4.5 million were totally identified, and then the design team was actually recommending out of that amount, $3.5 million were things that we thought would be worth discussing with the district. We can talk about that. But when you do a value engineering exercise, really the design team and the construction manager talk about these things, and then the very next step is you get with the district and talk to them about what they're willing to accept and what they're not willing to accept, and that kind of completes the process. So we have not completed the process because we have not had that discussion with the district on which ones to take.
Okay. All right. And is that list something, and as well as the plan, something we can put up on the website, Debbie, so that people can kind of see what we're talking about at this point? Because this information is all different and new from the forum.
You're muted, Debbie.
You're muted.
I thought you might prefer me muted. Yeah, that's fine with me. I think we have a spot for that, or we have a website for that, so I have no problem with that. I have one question, Kevin, for you. You're very familiar with our other buildings. Would these finishes be comparable to what we have in our other buildings?
Absolutely, yes.
You know, I think we have wonderful buildings, and we've often been praised on them, but I'm not sure it's really been the tradition of Woodford County to kind of do the Fayette County model where everything is millions of dollars more. But these would be in line with the finishes that we have today in our other buildings. So that's okay. That was my question.
That is correct.
Okay.
Hey, Kevin,
Yeah.
if how much does the cost go up if you try to increase seating in the gymnasium? And at 1,800 just seems a little tight for if we host events and things like that, district tournaments, those types of things. And one thing, and just with what we've gone through this year with graduation, you know, you'd love to be able to host your own, you know, because then you can set your own schedule. If you were to go to like 3,000, how much does that? I'm just curious because I mean, again, I think that's one of those things that right now we have a really tiny gym that you can't do much with in terms of hosting events. And that's the only reason I'm asking, is that it could be utilized maybe for some other things that might be advantageous, again, as you're planning. So I'm just asking hypothetically, if you wanted to increase the seating, how does that impact the cost of something like that?
Well, Mr. Hawkins, I think the first thing I would tell you is that your existing gymnasium, I think only, we actually did a seat count on it, and it's slightly less than 1,700.
Yeah.
And so this is going up to 18. You can get up to 2,000 probably without impacting the building too much, and we would have, to be totally honest with you, we haven't done a 18-inch per butt seat count on this one. It's pretty close to 1,800. It might be a little bit more than that. We could get to 2,000 pretty easily without impacting the cost all that much. When you go to 3,000, that's a little bit different scenario, and we could certainly take a look at studying that and seeing what kind of a size increase that would take. Is it going to be a full $240 a square foot? No. When you're increasing a gymnasium and you're maybe increasing the size of the perimeter by 10 feet on two sides, that's not the full 240 or 200 whatever dollars a square foot that you'd be doing in order to get to that number. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious, because again, with what we typically have to go through each year with trying to set graduation and coordinate with other districts, it'd be nice not to have to deal with that if it were not too much more in terms of cost to be able to get you to that point.
Understood.
I think it's a great question, but where would we have to get? Didn't we look for 6,000 seats for graduation?
Yeah, we typically have between 3,000 and 4,000 attend a graduation. I think the horse park seats right around 4,000 or 4,500, and we always had empty seats there. And I think the Civic Center seated around 5,000, and we typically had empty seats there. So you might have to ticket it, to 10 tickets per person or something along those lines. But if you were in that 3,000, 3,200 range, it might be doable. And again, just something as you think toward the future, if the horse park ever is not available, we don't really have a good place that's close to be able to do something like that. And so, again, just kind of thinking outside the box on that.
Well, and you don't want to have to try and add on to a gym later on.
No.
Yeah, that's very difficult to do. Yes.
Yeah.
Is it possible, Kevin, to make it almost a pit where you walk in on the upper level and you build the gym down to create additional seating and a walking track and some things like that? Is that much more costly?
Well, in this particular site, we're encountering rock at some very shallow depths in this area, so you would be excavating rock, and that does get rather pricey on you pretty quick.
Okay.
But again, we can take a look at that, Mr. Hawkins, and see exactly what we could do and what makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions regarding option number one? Okay. Option number two is basically the same. Again, we kind of gave up on the idea of the auxiliary gym, and so it's still showing the competition gym here for the same size. Really, the main difference between option number one and option number two is saying that there is a additional wing that would be built out here for the classroom spaces, and that would necessitate basically a redistricting effort, and that redistricting effort, I understand, is nothing that any district ever wants to do, and it is absolutely something that most architects don't want to recommend. But in our particular case, we thought it was an option to consider because number one, it gives you more financial flexibility. Number two, what we will be talking about from a redistricting standpoint is that the 6th grade students that currently go to the middle school, if they stayed in the elementary school system, so you would change your district structure to a preschool through 6, and then a 7-9 in the middle school, and then a 10-12 in the high school. So moving those 6th graders out of the middle school into the extra capacity that you have in the elementary schools would also take the numbers down a little bit for the middle school, so it would be less overcrowded. I think it's 960 or something right now. It would take it to about 900. And then what that does, 6th graders tend to perform a little bit better both academically and from a disciplinary standpoint when they remain in elementary schools. So there was that particular option. It seemed to be something that might be beneficial to the district to discuss. I understand it's a very difficult topic to bring up, but this does give the board more flexibility as far as the amount of financial burden that they would have. So instead of the $4 million or so flexibility that we had talked about in option number 1, it gives you close to a $10 million flexibility in option number 2 to be able to do this. So the way this would be structured is like the auditorium. It would be an additive alternate to the project. So if the numbers do come in good, the board would say, hey, that's our first priority. We want to build out that classroom wing for 1350, and that's the first alternate that you take on bid day. So that's where that is. Everything else is fairly much the same. Obviously, there's some more cons that we need to discuss on this particular project. Your current LPC would probably have to be reconvened depending on what KDE does, whether you would have to do a finding or amend your current district facility plan. And then we'd also have to have a discussion with KDE about the size of a 1,000-student high school being a little bit over what the KDE guidelines recommend. So those are some things that do that. The good news is the redistricting wouldn't have to take place for another 2 years or so when the project is actually ready in August of 2023. So that's where this particular option came up. Any questions regarding option number 2?
I don't have a question as much as an observation on this one. In looking at this, and Mr. Hawkins can probably weigh in on this, some of the things that come to mind is the number of freshmen that take upper level classes or, AP classes and how that would happen. I think that logistically, there's a lot to consider.
There is, very much so.
On not, having all of those in the same building, all of those grade levels.
Well, and I would just say, sorry, Danny, go ahead.
No, I think that was Debbie starting to talk.
Oh, I'm sorry, Debbie, go ahead.
I do agree with Danny. I do want to say that I know the idea of moving the 9th grade came from the forum. So we're always appreciative that you're thinking outside the box. People are taking those ideas. I don't, I just think we need a lot more discussion. It is interesting to me. I think it is interesting, but it would need to really be kind of led by our educators and academic people about putting the 6th grade back into the elementary school. That's not something I'd be familiar or comfortable with doing without a lot of discussion with them. I've read the same things. I've heard the same things from people that actually work in this district, that that's a good idea. Again, one of the benefits of building the high school over by the middle school was that campus atmosphere. Now, there is a little bit of difference between them, but it's not completely unreasonable to think that things could be arranged so that a person in one building, the middle school, as a 9th grader, could walk over to the high school and take a class. So, there's, and that was one of the thoughts and one of the best benefits of that land being right by the middle school that I always saw was shared facilities, we have 8th graders that probably should be taking high school classes, that could easily go over there. So that was kind of one of the things by building that. So those are, I can see those as being workable, but it is a real restructure of what we're doing now, and I think take a lot of conversation. But I do appreciate the plan. I think it's interesting. And I guess the idea, Kevin, is then, later it would turn into a 4-year high school as funds became available. Was that
Again,
outlook on that, or?
Well, I guess the way I would look at it is if the bids come in favorably, you would be able to, accept that alternate, and it gets built and it's done. It's a 1350 high school with expanded science classroom spaces. So it's really just kind of a restructuring of this. It's not saying that we would necessarily build it for 1,000, but it's saying this is a way to give you more financial flexibility on bid day. So
Right.
that's really all it is.
And it's basically kind of switching out the alternative, the competitive gym as an alternative to the extra classical rooms as an alternative. Because the gym is in there at the first go, right?
The competition gym is in this particular scheme in the first go.
Right.
Yeah, and if we want to discuss doing an auxiliary gym, the problem that the design team has really, Ms. Evelyn, is that it's hard for us to design both an auxiliary gym and a competition gym to do those types of things in the bid documents. Is difficult for us to do. We can do it if we have to, but it seemed like there was so much kind of overwhelming support for doing a competition gym that it seemed to make sense, at least to us, not being totally involved in these things, that was the direction that most folks wanted to head.
Okay, thank you. And thanks again for something we hadn't thought of. That's what we rely on you for, so thank you.
Well,
Appreciate it.
All my questions on that.
just one quick point of clarification. The actual idea that was raised in the forum was to leave the 9th grade at the current high school and build a 10 through 12. So it wasn't to reconfigure every elementary school and the middle school. And so that was the original suggestion or idea that was brought forth at the forum. So, but as you said, that there would be a tremendous amount of mainly on the teacher side of things, when you start that, because we have very few teachers who teach just all freshmen. So they're going to be traveling back and forth between buildings if that were to be the case. And then you also have certification issues when you move 6th grade back to the elementary schools. Because right now, a lot of our middle school teachers are 5.8 certified. So they would have the ability to teach 5th and 6th grade, but you wouldn't have necessarily the ability to change classes and have the rotational opportunities that 6th graders currently have in the middle school. So it would be a challenge from a teacher and from a certification standpoint, for sure.
Well, and then maybe this same plan you could do it by leaving the 9th grade in the high school.
That would still be
close to those classes,
right.
But and knowing that the goal was to eventually get to a 4-year high school and to have 6 through 8 on that campus, where there could be some mobility between buildings. So there's some other, maybe little tweaks to this or hybrids to this that would still make it work. So.
Debbie, I just had a few things.
Okay.
It sounds like we're kind of trying to have the tail wag the dog here. We want a school so badly that we're willing to reconfigure all 4 elementaries, our middle school and our high school, just so we can build something. And that just seems like a really bad idea to me, especially when you consider we have one of the best high-performing middle schools and high schools in the state. So I guess my question is, are we saying our strategy would be to restrict money that we don't have to create a 3rd-year deficit spending and then hope that the bids come in 20% under the estimated cost so that we could potentially build just something?
Is that a question, a rhetorical question, or what?
Well, I mean, I guess it's an actual question, for the architect. Do you have any other districts that are moving forward with major construction projects that don't have sufficient funds to cover the costs? And what would the plan be if the bids didn't come in 20% or 30% under? It's baffling to me, and I love thinking outside the box, just to be clear. I think that's a good thing. But it's baffling to me that we would have a plan that we've never discussed with the public, that we've never even discussed publicly, that literally I found out Monday that we were talking about redistricting all 4 elementary schools, our middle school and our high school, to build a 10th through 12th grade center. It boggles the mind. And again, I think it just shows, a complete lack of a plan and a complete lack of leadership on this project for this to be coming out now when our next agenda item is to select a design option for the high school. And we're just now talking about this?
Well, let me reply to that, Ms. Springate, and say that, no, I understand that redistricting is something that is not a popular thing. But this was information that was given to the board previously back in late March. This is the first time that we have had a chance to discuss it publicly, and so that's really the purpose of this, is to have that discussion about it. The board may decide that that's an absolutely horrible idea, and that is absolutely fine. This is just the architect, your architect, trying to come up with solutions for you to make a decision as to which way you want to go forward. That's all this is. We're not trying to push one particular option. We're just trying to give you options, and then you guys need to make the decision as to how we're going to move forward. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, does anybody have any specific questions about the plan when we're looking at the actual drawings? They don't really look that different. I'm trying to compare, Kevin. It looks like we just later add
Yeah, there's some addition to the wings at the end for standard bathrooms, basically, that, it would allow, I mean, that growth is there already. There's actually growth built into the site plan for those wings to grow even more in case the district needs to expand the high school from its current configuration.
Right. Because even the plan to go ahead and build a 1350, 1401 has that ability now. So this is just shortening those wings a little bit at the first and then going, okay. Were there any other differences between the actual plan that we should be pointed out to us? Look pretty similar otherwise. The gym, the cafeteria, all that would be the same. It would be built for 1350 or for the larger amount of children.
Yes, all the 4 spaces, the cafeteria, the media center, the kitchen, all of those spaces would be the same. The gymnasium would be the same. Administration would be the same. So it's really, it's just trying to give you a larger chunk of the building for an alternate. That gives you obviously the flexibility on bid day.
Okay. Allison or Mr. Wilson, do you have any questions on any of these options?
No, ma'am, I'm good, thank you.
All right. Okay, are we ready for option 3, Kevin?
Yeah, so option number 3 is a preliminary look at what it would take to renovate the existing high school. KDE does have a limitation on what you can do for renovations. It's 80% of the cost of a new high school. So that total amount for the total project cost would be roughly $35.6 million that you would be allowed to spend for the renovation of the existing high school. What we have shown here, I don't know if you can see, the first thing would be to build a 3-story academic wing in the current bus loop in this area. We would go ahead and reconfigure the front parent drop-off while this is being constructed. Phase 2 would demolish the existing portion of the classroom buildings and the media center. And phase 3 would be to build a new media center auditorium and expand the kitchen. The kitchen size of the current high school is woefully inadequate. And then the final phase would be actually the renovation of these back spaces, a lot of the CTE spaces, the cafeteria, the kitchen, and the existing gymnasium, PE areas. Those would be renovated at the very end of the project. And that would probably occur during the summer months of phases 1 through 3. So when you look at a renovation, you know, there are some pros to this. Obviously, the first one, it provides the district with the least expensive option. It provides new academic spaces, classrooms, administration, media center, and it adds an auditorium to the existing high school. Some of the cons here are a longer construction period. Can be very disruptive to students and staff who are going to be continuing to occupy the building during the phase construction. The existing gym, cafeteria, music suite, and ag spaces would only receive minor renovations, so that is a negative. The existing site is still limited. I mean, you're where you are. You have about, I think it's 24 acres, somewhere in that neighborhood. You're going to be very constrained from a site standpoint, so there won't be the opportunity that I can see of any athletic fields or anything like that being built on the site. There are some site drainage issues, obviously back behind the existing gymnasium, that we would have to take those into account. And then basically it would be a whole new design for the project. So some of those things are definite negatives. The schedule for this, obviously probably bidding in June of next year, starting construction in July, and probably looking at a January 2025 completion date. But again, this is a preliminary study, and this is just something that we thought that there was some interest in looking at least discussing.
I have a quick question. Earlier you said we would probably want to bid in January for the other projects, and just now you said bid in June. Is there what's the reason for the difference?
Well, we would have to redesign. We'd have to start fresh with the design for the high school.
For the timeline for the design, gotcha. And then the next question is, so is option 3, the renovation, is that the only option that we could actually afford with our current BG1?
No, absolutely not.
So our BG1 is for how much? 30?
I think it's $36 million, 36.25.
Okay, and so this one is 35 million. Option number 2 was 44 million for the partial and 54 for the total. And then option number 1 was 50 for just the classroom and the gym, and 54 for the full. So I'm just looking at this list. I don't see anything on here that's under 36 except option number 3.
Yeah, depending on what you do with option number 3. I mean, this was a very preliminary study that we did just to help you guys out. There could be there's probably 4 or 5 different ways that you could renovate the existing high school. What we were trying to concentrate on is building a portion of the classrooms while classrooms could go, maintain in the existing high school while new construction is being done. What you don't want to do is try to renovate portions of the existing high school while classes are going on. That can be done, but I would defer to Dave West and Sam about doing that and the disruption that would potentially cause.
Yeah, and I'm not advocating for option number 3. I'm just looking at the costs, and it looks to me like the only one that we have enough money for on the current BG1 would be option number 3.
And I think too, on option number 1, Mr. Luck, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but if we were to set an amount for the BG1, then you guys would kind of work progressively back to make the bid alternates with the base bid, and then the alternates to make that work with the funding that we allocate. Is that correct?
That is correct. And to I would say that if you took let's say you took $2.5 million of the BE items, and those were accepted. So we had identified 4.5. We think 3.5 of that is decent. Say the school district says only 2.5 are good. So that let's assume $2.5 million in value engineering for the project. And then if you look at what we had talked about previously with the individual board member meetings that we had of a 6.5% decrease in construction cost. So if you run that particular scenario, then what you're looking at for the base bid of the project in option number 1 is roughly a $43.5 million total project cost. So those two items, the VE options and assuming a 6.5%, and of course, my construction manager right now is probably not glad that I'm saying this, and I would love for him to talk about this as well. But if we assume, with Tates Creek High School kind of indicating some of the pricing that we're seeing, and then other projects as well are coming in significantly under budget right now. If we even don't take a 10%, but just take a 6.5% decrease, that gets the base bid of option 1 down to roughly 43.5 total project cost. And this might be a good time.
Do you want to weigh in there?
I agree with Kevin as far as and it's not a crystal ball, but based on what we're seeing so far, even projects we're bidding, there's going to be a significant decrease in construction costs over the next quarter, first quarter of next year. And, there's no way for us to predict that, but, I feel like being conservative at 6% would be on the mark.
Okay, and then I have some questions if that's okay. Sherry, do you want to go first or you want me?
No, the only point I was going to make is some of the lists from the cuts look like we're talking about maybe doing a shingle roof, gravel parking lots, wooden bleachers, removing the clock tower, some pretty big things that are real changes from the what the steering committee and what we saw at the forum. So if you don't mind, if we can have Debbie that attached to the school's website, just so people can kind of get an idea of what kind of cuts we're talking about, the 4.5 or 3.5, or even if the board only decides to do 2.5 of those. And then my last point is just, again, the 43.5 is still more than our current BG1. So the only option that we would be able to afford from this list, again, is just the renovation. That's all I have. Thank you, Danny.
And if I could address Ms. Springgate's comments about the value engineering, that list is a total list of ideas that were generated. A lot of them were not proven to be good ideas, but we discussed them anyway. I still would go back to my comment earlier about value engineering being complete when the owner has had a chance to be involved in that process. Some of those things that you noted were not, thought to be reasonable items, such as the wood bleachers. The gravel parking lot was for parking lots in excess of what the district asked for from a parking count standpoint, and some things like that. So, I'm fine if we want to go ahead and publish this, but just with the caveat that it's an incomplete process at this point.
Kevin, then I can work with you to make sure that we want to be transparent as possible. So we don't want to, print a list that doesn't have all the caveats and the explanations on it. That wouldn't be transparent. So if we want to work together on it, just to make sure that what you just said is included, we can do that. And then we can get it out to Sherry. Okay?
Yeah, that sounds fine. And then maybe we'll have to adjust the numbers, the estimates that were given, if the total changes from 4.5 million in possible construction cuts, or I don't know what you called it, I'm sorry, construction cost engineering or something.
Value.
Right. So that might change some of the estimates. So if it was a $4.5 million total list, and then the new number given maybe 43.5, You know what I mean? I just want to be clear that we adjusted the end number 2.
Danny?
Okay, I've got a couple of questions for Kelly, if you don't care. Looking at the numbers, do you have, when did Baird first partner with Woodford County Schools?
In August of 2018.
And do you know what the bonding capacity was at that time?
Yes. At beginning in July of 2018, a new biennium started. So a new FSPK funding, and then one of your nickels was equalized and matched. So your facility funding nickel actually only received matching until a certain period. They extended it in that biennium. So bonding capacity was right around 24 million at that point. That includes SFCC bonding, local capacity about 22 million, and then the difference from the SFCC offers.
So our bonding capacity has grown from 24 million to what is it today without any restriction?
Without,
or on your May numbers?
and just to clarify, that included 80% capital outlays.
Okay.
Just 24 million. So no general fund, 80% capital outlay. Today it's right under 30. It's right around 37 million.
Okay. And I know our bonding capacity goes up all of the time as we make debt payments and things like that. And the other thing is we do have that nickel that will fall off. When does that fall off?
Your state matching will end in fiscal year 2038. Originally, before the last biennium, it was actually going to end in 2025. So they extended it for 13 more years. So you'll have it until fiscal year 2038.
And so the increase in bonding capacity, obviously that's a huge amount in a relatively short amount of time. I'm sure that's in part due to interest rates being so favorable. What other factors play in there?
The FSPK equalization, they increased that funding quite a bit. So you saw a big jump in your capacity immediately within beginning this fiscal year, or July 1 of upcoming fiscal year.
Okay. And then for, I guess, Ms. Smith probably on this, if we would move forward with this project and get to bid day and the numbers do not come in at the projections for any host of reasons, what is our obligation on bid day to move forward?
My understanding, you have no obligation to move forward.
Okay.
You're not required, I mean, you're not going to be forced to accept and approve those big bids. Is that not correct, Kevin?
That is correct.
Okay. And I think that's all I have.
I have just a few follow-up questions. Kelly, I'm looking at your chart that you gave us for May of 2020, and I think, if I'm understanding what Danny is saying correctly, she was asking what our bonding capacity was in August of 2018 with no capital outlay. That was 24 million. And if I look at your chart that you just gave us in May with no capital outlay, that would give us 28 million. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think the 24 million included 80% capital outlay. So if I would, I could strip out the capital outlay for you, but that 24 million would probably go down. Let me think about it.
I think it's okay as long as we're comparing apples to apples.
So it'd be 24 million compared to 37 million, not 24 compared to 28. So that makes sense, Ms. Springate.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is for Amy. Amy, I understand that we can, on the day, if we don't have the funds, and it really doesn't look like we do have the funds looking at the BG1 in our budget, but in the process of this past year and a half, getting up to bid day, could you just remind us how much we've spent towards this project, working towards the new high school so far? So even if we can drop it on bid day and not have to expend any funds then, how many funds to date, how much money to date have we spent?
Through the end of May, we have spent $633,316.
Okay, thank you.
And Ms. Smith, would you advocate for moving forward to bid day, knowing that that money is already spent?
As we have said before, our recommendation at this point in time is to cancel this BG1.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, I think we have spent we have spent $633,000, and we have something for that money. We have a plan. There may be some people who didn't like the way the plan came about. I would encourage them to talk to Mayor Trockett. I would encourage them to talk to Jimmy Brim. I would encourage them to talk to Brenda Richards about the process. And Kevin's countless hours. And so we have spent some. We're further down the road with something that everybody in the county and that the last 3 or 4 district facility plans have said is very needed and is the top priority. So yeah, we'll spend something. We have something for that. Until we go to bid, and I have been encouraged in the past by staff members that we should just go to bid and find out what the costs are going to be, because I think maybe I'm just stating the obvious to everybody, and I don't mean to do that, but clearly until we go to bid, these are all estimates. Our construction manager and our architect are the expertise. They've got their ear to the ground on what's happening in this very volatile time in our economy and in our state. So they see things going down, but until we go to bid, we're just not going to know. And I think it's always important to remind people of that. Would you agree, Kevin?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So are there any other questions on option 3? I think maybe we just kind of open it up for some discussion. If board members want to talk about what they think the pros and cons, the best or worst of these ideas are. I did put on the agenda in the event that we wanted to do this tonight to select a design option for the high school. We can move on into a motion for that. We can have a discussion and decide to table it or whatever. I did put it on there because in the event that we did want to do it, I wanted to have that opportunity. Any thoughts, discussions?
I would say anything that we can shore up tonight and have a plan so that we don't have to continue having this on the agenda each and every month as a divisive issue, that it's a good thing. If we can move past this and stop having the divisive conversations at each board meeting, that is certainly something that I would be a proponent of.
Do you have a preference among these options, Danny?
My preference would be a modified version of option 1. And I think that the modifications of that are tough to define until we look at other options or other items on the agenda, as far as the funding and how the board wants to allocate that. I almost feel like setting the modifications can't be done until the discussion is had on the funding. And that's been a point that Ms. Springate has made several times and is correct, is that we need to make sure that our BG1 matches the funding that we are moving forward with so that we can stop reinventing the wheel each time. So my preference is, like I said, to get it all shored up tonight and move forward as a cohesive board and administrative team.
Well, and I guess my only comment would be that it feels again like we have a forum scheduled. We had the first forum. I don't know that we listened to anything the public said then, because we continue down this path. And so I guess my concern is we have a forum scheduled for the 7th of next month. And if we make the decision tonight, then I'm not clear on how we would involve the public at all, except to tell them after the fact what we're going to be giving them and doing for them. And I just don't think that's right. And then my second question is just, are you saying you want to do the phase high school for 50 million, or are you saying you want to try to do the full high school for 54 million?
Me?
Option one, yeah, which option one were you?
Well, like I said, I think we need to modify option one so that it matches the funding available. Like I asked Mr. Locke earlier, can we look at the number and then change the alternates so that it matches what we have allocated for the project?
Okay, and if you do that, Mr. Locke, is that something you could post on our website also so people could see the difference and what's being cut and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, if you're saying that there would be a discussion and a decision made by the board on which VE options they want to take, and I mean, we can make those decisions in concert with the board as to which options from a value engineering standpoint that we want to take. Now, if the board decides that they like option number one, that they want an auxiliary gym instead of a competition gym, you know, that's something that we would have to go back and study a little bit and tweak the numbers. But if the modifications to the current plan are things that are already designed, then absolutely we can tailor it to a certain extent to match what the number is.
But
Does that make sense?
Kevin, at ever how the alternates are adjusted, the total project cost is 53.9 million. Is that correct?
That's where it stands correct, but right now, but again, we haven't taken into consideration any of the value engineering options or any of the estimated decreases in the bidding environment that we're seeing currently. So those have not been taken into account.
No, I understand that, but to Ms. Bradley's point on talking about modifying option one,
Mm-hmm.
what I'm understanding that to mean is we would switch out alternates to reduce a base bid, but the total project with the alternates that we have is 53.9 million. That is your estimate right now.
So, yes, that's the estimate right now, $54 million with all the alternates in there. And again, the alternates can be accepted by the board or not accepted by the board on bid date. Right.
So I'm going to kind of switch over to the BG1 a little bit. Kelly, Kevin, Amy, anybody weigh in on this? Our BG1 is a very fluid document. That's how it's always been described to me. If we have a project cost, if we pick an option of option one, and my understanding of option one is that the total cost is 53, but then if we don't have 53, we take off the auditorium. If we still don't have enough, then we take off the geothermal. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That's how alternates work, right? It's not like adding, it's like we're starting with all of them and then we'll take them off.
Well, the base bid doesn't have them, and then on bid bid, you would accept them or not accept them.
Okay. If we have a BG1 of 36 million, that does not preclude us from choosing option one, waiting to see, just to keep it going, or, Kelly or whoever, if we choose option one now, do we have to adopt the BG1 with $54 million in funding?
Just doing the math, that looks like close to a 40% shift, or about $14 million. We're seeing 53 to 36 million. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So it's over a 40% change in the cost. I think you would want to resubmit a BG1 that more aligns with the project. Because Kevin really can't get his process going unless he has KDE's approval to proceed with that plan. Kevin, did you agree to that?
That's correct, Kelly. And KDE is probably going to write when they review that we have not submitted the design development drawings because the board has not approved them. But if they see a BG1 that is a $36 million project and they see the plans that are obviously more expensive than that, during their review of the design development documents, they would red flag that and say, please confirm. Now, but you are correct in your initial comment, Ms. Edelin, that BG1s are document. They don't have to be exact moving forward. Very often they're off by 10% or more once it goes to bid. So it is a fluid document. It is something that is being adjusted as the process moves along. However, it would be beneficial and advisable, I guess, to have the BG1 closely match what we're doing. And whether that includes alternates or not alternates has never been anything that KDE has regulated. So what I'm saying is we may have $5 million worth of alternates that are not shown on the BG1 or the BG3.
Well, I understand that our current BG1 has a little red flag on it. Because even when it was, is that true? Or
there was a comment made
or something, a comment, yeah. What if we raise the BG1 to 44 million? Would that be close enough to this base bid of 49? In your experience with KDE, knowing that we are in a fluid construction cost environment,
I don't anticipate having any issues with that before.
Kevin, I'm kind of having a hard time understanding you. Can you say it again?
I don't anticipate KDE having any issues with a $44 million total project cost in a BG1 for this project.
What about you, Kelly? What's your opinion on that?
I think a preliminary BG1, like you said, is a fluid document, and I think that they understand you're getting the process going. So I don't think it would cause as much, it doesn't give me as much concern that it's closer.
I was leaving it at 36. Is that right?
Yes, I will know. We
Okay.
can show a finance plan that matches whatever number you come up with. So if it's 48 million, we have to submit how you're going to pay for it.
But if it's 44 million, and this is when we get down to a different stage and Kevin's actually submitting something. I mean, right now, I think in my mind, we're in a very fluid situation with everything with COVID. I do not want to jeopardize the investment we've made. I think it's been a wise and a good investment, and we're a lot closer to providing the number one need of this county. But then I kind of want to wait and see. So I don't know what the balance is there. Like, just keep it alive, keep it in a place. But if we need to raise the BG1 to match more what option one is, if we choose option one, Danny's right. We need to consider these two things in passing. Right? Yeah, is that what you were thinking, Danny? Or have I stated it correctly or not?
Yeah, I think that's an accurate recap. But I guess then the question becomes, and I have said in previous meetings that I'm an advocate for getting everything cleaned up and correct, and then pausing and seeing what happens with our economy and what happens within the Commonwealth and what the state of things are. As far as defining that time frame, I think that's something we have to discuss.
Right, and that's on the agenda. It's just all kind of coming together now because it is all part and parcel. So
Well, I just have a couple things. Number one, I really do not believe that the number one need of our district is a new facility at this point. I think it's the reentry of our students. I think it's making sure our staff is adequately compensated. I think it's making sure we balance our budget and keep the programs that we have that have made our schools great. And then the second thing is, even if we restrict this amount that would be needed, I guess, to get the BG1 up to 45 million, we would be looking at doing 80% of capital outlay and $350,000 restriction year after year after year, when we know that causes budget deficits, when we know that we didn't even have the first 350 to set aside for this project, we had to borrow it from our contingency. So I have some real concerns with just the consequences of our actions. I don't mind throwing ideas out there, but I think we have to be really careful and listen to Amy and listen to Mr. Hawkins about the ramifications of that. So if you want to spend your money on one thing, that means you're going to have to cut other things. That's just the reality. And so I think we just need to be really careful not to, just put something on paper to have something on paper.
Okay, let's see how we should go forward on this. The first thing listed on the agenda is select a design option for the high school. Do we have any motions on that? We've been presented with 3 options. Or do you want to move it and address another agenda item first? Does anybody want to do that?
I would advocate for moving it until the funding is realized. I don't know how you.
So which agenda item, Ms. Bradley, are you suggesting we go to first? A through D, which are the ones that C. Okay. That is consider a resolution restricting general fund revenue for construction costs and or debt service for future construction projects. This was on the agenda for last week. We got tangled up a little bit in the resolution language because it said in the resolution clause that it would just be for debt service. I talked to Mr. Frankel. I told him of that issue. He amended it to say general fund revenues for fiscal year 2021 to pay the cost of the construction project and or to make necessary lease payments to the corporation. So that gave us more flexibility. I will say as a little aside here, the only ones he sent me on these resolutions that were attached to your agenda are for the year 2021, so I would amend that to be 1920. So please make note of that, and I would make a motion that we adopt the resolution for 1920 attached to your agenda item for $350,000. The only amendment to that resolution is that this is for the year 1920 instead of 2021. Do we have a second? Okay. Then the motion will.
I think Allison was speaking.
Oh, I'm sorry, Alice. You have to really speak up.
Can you read that again, please? I'm sorry. It was breaking up on my end.
Okay. The resolution is the same one that we had last week. We had a little questions about the language. So this has been changed so that we could use this restricted money to pay the costs of the construction project and or to make necessary lease payments to the corporation. It's attached to your agenda item now, but the one attached to the agenda item is for the year 2021. My motion is for the year 1920, so that would be amended to 1920 instead of 2021. So basically, this is a motion to restrict $350,000 for the year 1920 to pay construction costs or debt service on construction projects. And again, the reason for this was because they thought it was better to do it year by year instead of one that says it's going forward every year. So that's my motion, is to adopt the resolution for the fiscal year 1920 to restrict $350,000 to pay the cost of the construction projects and or to make necessary lease payments to the corporation.
Second.
So I'm motioned by the chair, second by Ms. Richardson.
I have
Any
some
discussion? Of course.
Well, again, this is taxpayer money. I think it's really important that we discuss it in an open meeting. Amy, my first question is for you. Our fiscal year 2020 is about to close just in a few days. Could you provide the difference between our spending and revenue as we close out the year if the $350,000 restriction is eliminated and we return that to general fund?
I do not have that number available. I can look some things up and get back with you in just a few moments.
Okay. But in simple terms, would it be accurate to say that if we return this money to the general fund, that would decrease our deficit by around $350,000?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. And so if we restrict it, that's going to increase our deficit. So I guess my question is really, why would we do this? Last week, we wouldn't even consider any budget cuts. We've been given a list of things that would have to be cut to balance this out, and we just haven't done that. I think just spending monies that we don't have is reckless, especially with the current pandemic and the economic situation. But also, I would just note that we promised in the forum that if we had these deficit spending, that we would balance that. We promised when we did the $350,000 restriction that we didn't have in general fund, we had to borrow from our contingency, that we would not do that in future years. So I guess my question is, why would we do this?
I think it's noteworthy in looking at your recap of the whole thing. We have to remember too that we unrestricted the $600,000 that were previously part of that deficit, and that Mr. Hawkins was able to identify $280,000 worth of cuts that we adopted. And the other part is that we are reenacting a motion and an agenda item that was already voted on and passed and implemented because the wording wasn't suitable for the bond agent. And going a step further back than that, this money came as part of the revenue from a 4% tax increase. And we, that year, saw almost, Ms. Smith, you can correct me on the exact numbers, but $700,000 in increase from that 4%. We only restricted part of it, and then our distilled spirits ended up coming in, I think, $200,000 higher than what we thought it would. All of those factors all have to be considered in looking at the historical picture as well.
Well, and just to be clear, the $280,000 we made in cuts, we diverted that to be used by Mr. Hawkins for the COVID reentry. We all thought and voted that that was an important thing. So we can't really count that as extra money at this point. It's spent money. And the other thing is that $350,000 did not come from the tax increase that year, Danny. I think Amy can clarify for us, but I clearly recall that had to come from our contingency because we did not have an extra $350,000 from our tax increase of 4% that year.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Is
ma'am.
that your recollection of things?
My recollection of the thing is that we enacted by a 3-2 vote a tax increase that generated approximately $700,000. $350,000 went into the general fund. The other $350,000 was set aside as restricted money dedicated to the building of a new high school. Superintendent and Ms. Smith listed it as an expense, and to reconcile it on their ledger, they took the money out of contingency as an expense. That's my recollection.
Amy, could you clarify for us, or Mr. Hawkins?
I mean, the board took action in November to take the money from the contingency. So that's where the $350,000 came from. And that
Thank
is,
you.
that was board action taken in November.
And had we had not had the 4% that year, we would have been down 700,000, which I assume would have,
It wouldn't have been the full 700,000. It would have been the difference between the increase that would have naturally happened due to increase in assessments. So it wouldn't have been
and
the
that's
full
about
amount.
700,000, isn't it, Amy?
No,
What is it?
it was about 350 to 400,000 is what we increased over due to the 4%.
Okay. Anyway, so now so we have a motion and a second. Is there, does Ms. Richardson or Mr. Wilson, do you have any discussion on this item?
Go ahead.
Debbie, I did have a couple of other things. We just determined that we're somewhere in the neighborhood of $13 to $14 million away from a new high school without any general fund commitment. How would using this 350 one-time cash restriction help us with the goal of a comprehensive high school?
I think one time, when we say one time, and again, this is where we're getting tied up with the language in the bond, in the resolution. When we restricted the 600,000, it was the intent of everybody that was going to go on, and we included it in our BG1 and in our budgets. But then, because of the technical legal thing, it was just a 1 year. This is something that we're doing correctly this time, and we're all understanding. But this is one time tonight for this year. Future boards can decide if they want to continue to do it and put it against bonding. My assumption is that we will treat it like we did the 600 with the same type of language in the resolution and consider it going forward as bonding resources that can be used for bonding.
So I guess my final point is just that the architect has said that this wouldn't be bid until next year, January or so. And now we're saying that we wouldn't really determine the funding until next year. So I guess my question is, why would we not just rescind the BG1, return this cash to our general fund? That way we can see where we are deficit-wise with the pandemic, with the economic crisis. And then also, since the new board will be making the decisions come January, it just would seem fair and really ethical to allow them to also make these decisions too.
Well, they'll have every opportunity to unrestrict this. We're not going to be selling bonds before the new board takes their seats. And rescinding the BG1, I think, we've realized that is probably not the thing to do if we ever want to go forward with this project, which at some point in our history we're going to. There is still a question. First of all, we would have to start the process all over with KDE. And secondly, I have asked the question to KDE. I haven't gotten an answer. I don't know what would happen to the funds that we've committed to this. If we rescind it, if we'd have to pay it back to the general fund. So rescinding the BG1 has not been the advice of KDE or our attorney. But as far as, I think we've got your point on restricting this. Is there any further decision or discussion? All right, let's vote. Let's go ahead and go around the bend on this so that we're clear who's saying what. Ms. Springday?
Nay.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Richardson?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. The resolution passes 4-1. All right, then the next thing is to amend the BG1 for the new Woodford County High School BG 10-353. Again, both of these are attached to your agenda. We went over them last week somewhat. Our original BG1 has and Kelly and Amy or whoever jump in with me on this, the original BG1 has very different funding sources. At the time, to get to that amount, there was a $600,000 general fund commitment for the bonding. We no longer have that. our bonding has risen to a point that we don't need it. So the first BG1 option is the $36 million one. That leaves it at that amount. We did not rely on $350,000 for bonding. Please, am I right, Kelly and Amy?
Yes, correct.
Okay, and so that is the first option. Now, we still have restricted that $350,000 for at least this year, so that will go into the building fund. It just, at this point, it would not be listed on the BG1 as part of our funding for bonding. The second one, the second option for the BG1 raises it to 40, somebody help me, I'm looking for it on this sheet.
45.3.
45.3, thank you, Mr. Hawkins. It would include in the funding, funds available on the page 2, the 350, which would increase our bonding. Is that correct, Kelly?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So I think, first of all, we knew we needed to amend this to more accurate, even if we leave it at 36, to more accurately reflect where the funding is coming from. I think my advice that was given to me was to do that before June 30th, because KDE right now looks at us like we're using $600,000 in general fund for bonding, and we're not. So we just need to make our funding more clear. So it needed to be amended for that reason, and so we have two options here.
It also needs to be amended to reflect our increased bonding capacity.
Right, and that's just where the funding, like, we're taking out the 600 and replacing it with, we're taking out the general fund bonding that the original BG1 had, moving it to a different line. So it's kind of the same thing, we're just telling where the funding is coming from more accurately. Kelly?
Yes, that's correct. You're just more reflecting your own bonding potential. Obviously, it's a lot different than it was when the first.
Right, just kind of moving the funding to the correct lines, right?
Yes, exactly. This is just simply a reporting thing for KD. When you see the probable cost and funds available, just an internal document on their end.
Okay.
Madam Chairperson, are those the two options being offered?
Yes, sir.
I move
Option 1 is the one that keeps it at 36 million. Option 2, the one that raises it to 45.3. Yes.
Madam Chairman, I move we approve option number 2.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Ms. Richardson, Mr. Wilson has moved that we approve option number 2, which is the $45.3 million BG1. Ms. Richardson has seconded. All in favor, is there any discussion?
Yes, I would just note that that's requiring a $350,000 general fund contribution, not just the resolution we just passed for this year, but for every year when bonds are sold. And so that is obligating a new board to that funding mechanism. And then the other thing is, I would just reiterate that that is causing deficit spending in our district. We don't have the funds to do that. And so those are my main objections.
Any further discussion?
I think it's noteworthy that the $45.3 million is less than Mr. Locke's estimate that if we adopted the value engineering options, all of them, which I don't think it's probably likely that we would adopt them all, and then we see that 6.5% conservative estimate on construction costs, that exceeds the potential project cost. And I think that's a very positive thing for our district and for the students in Woodford County. And I think we've heard time and again from our consultants that our bonding capacity is really high in comparison to other districts, and sitting on that is not necessarily the right thing.
Just a quick point of clarification, that the 45 million would exceed the base bid. it would not exceed the total project cost. So I think that needs to be very clear that if you want the complete building, this is still not the same, it's not the amount that is needed to be able to cover that full cost of the complete building. So I just think that needs to be noted.
Okay, thank you.
And then, just one final point, I think a strategy of restricting money you don't have to create a third year of deficit spending and hoping that the bids come in under is just not a good strategy for moving forward with any project.
I have one question on this. If it came, we get in through the year, we get to the end of the year, our state funds are cut, all of a sudden we realize we really do need to give up that $350. We've looked at all of our expenses. We've kind of tried to figure out all the different numbers we've been getting. And then we take that away, then all of a sudden we don't have the funds to support this amount of a BG1. Would we at that point need to get rid of it, rescind it, change the funding? Kelly, do you understand my question?
It depends on if you've sold bonds.
Well,
Because if you-
all of this is pre-bond.
Right.
Pre-bond, yes. Kelly, but as far as could we just leave it like it is because it is so fluid? We don't have to change it every time.
I think you're correct in the fact that you wouldn't need to immediately change it. Obviously, KDE, they're taking this BG1 as a tool. And if they're not moving forward, if they're not doing their approval, then I don't think that you would immediately need to change it. That being said, you would probably, if you need the money, want to clear anything up before our fiscal year end.
Right.
For that
Before
purpose.
the July of 2021.
Correct. If you have any money in an odd year, you want to make sure that you have transferred that money over.
And there will be a new board to look at this, but this will be in place for them. These options will be available for them. If they don't want them, they can rescind them. So, all right. We have a motion and a second on the floor. Let's go around. This is for option number 2, which is the 45.3 BG1. Ms. Springate?
Nay.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Ms. Richardson?
Yes.
Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
The chair votes, I'm going to vote yes. Motion passes 4-1. All right, now we've got to go back to some of those things we skipped. Select a design option for the high school and set a timeline for continuation of high school project.
I would advocate for tabling this until Mr. Locke has time to review the funding that we just amended on the BG1. Is that
For selecting the design option? I know that Mr. Locke and Trace Creek are really looking for some direction from us, and they've been more than patient. So I think we should at least talk about the timeline. Kevin, can we just ask you a few questions about where we are in the process? And
Yes, go ahead.
we're hoping, if nothing else, to walk out of here tonight with some guidance on that.
Okay.
Is that true?
Yeah, so where we are from the design process right now is obviously finishing up design development. We anticipate somewhere around 5 months for us to complete the construction documents for the project. And again, about 2 months for bidding and negotiation, and then construction can start once the bonds are sold, if the board decides that that's the direction that they want to go. Where we are, I think probably the most critical thing that we need right now is a decision on which alternates you want to move forward with. So we made some suggestions about certain alternates, but it would be good to get some latitude or some guidance from the board as to whether they agree with the alternates that we've listed or whether there are additional alternates that they want us to consider. And that may be a work session that we have at a later date. We're totally flexible on that.
So when you're talking about these alternates, you're saying, okay, do we want the auditorium? You're not talking about the value-added stuff.
what I'm talking about is saying the board agreeing that they do want the auditorium to be an alternate. They do want the geothermal HVAC to be an alternate, et cetera, et cetera. And then if there's any other alternates that they want to give to us to incorporate into the documents, then we would do so.
Okay, and then would you want a priority on those alternates too, or would you give us
There
the
does not need to be a priority on the alternates. There, we would design the base bid and then we would design the alternates. It doesn't matter at this stage what the priorities are. And actually, once you bid the project, you do not have to prioritize your alternates as far as selections, like some owners like UK do.
Okay. Well, it does sound like perhaps I think we were going to try to get some of these decisions made tonight. I know you mentioned that, Danny. Danny, you want to table both of these? Is that what you're thinking? Both the select the option and the timeline?
That sounds to me on the selecting the options and identifying those alternates. That sounds to me like something that could be done with a meeting with Mr. Hawkins and Ms. Smith as the facilities director and Ross Torrent and Trace Creek and, one or two board members and then a proposal to the whole board.
Okay.
Seems like a good start.
I guess I agree. So we have a motion to table item A and item B on the regular agenda. Is there a second? I assume that's the motion, right?
I'm sorry, I can't second my own motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Richardson. All in favor, say aye.
Hold on just 1 second. I do want to say one more thing in that would also allow for the community forum to happen and get some feedback given the direction that the board has gone tonight with those alternates and things like that. I think it allows for time for people to, for us to get this uploaded and the community to see that as well. So now
Okay. All in favor of tabling item A and B, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes 5-0. All right, now we're on item E, update on financial consultant search and determine scope of financial consultant responsibilities. That would be you, Mrs. Bradley. You want to talk to us about that?
Sure. I think that just kind of catching everyone up on this, Ms. Evelyn had delegated this responsibility and Ms. Springate and I have been in contact on this quite a bit at, every step that we've taken so far. And we got some referrals of consultants from Mr. Salisbury and then from Chenoweth Law Office. And we've reached out to a number of those and had a chance to talk to a couple of them. Some of them have, they're not able to do that, or spoke to one gentleman who, because he's in the state teacher retirement system, he can't do consulting. It doesn't work with their retirement funds that way. One question that has come up in having some of these conversations and with Ms. Springate and I is better defining the scope of what we're going to ask them to look at. It's hard for anyone to give an estimate on the total cost of their services or even a preliminary cost if they're not sure what all they are going to look at. So I was hoping that we could discuss that tonight and have a little bit more direction as Ms. Springate and I continue to reach out. And then I would like to hope that we can come back at the July meeting with a list of names and qualifications, and we can move forward with that then. Sherry, is that correct?
Yeah, I would just add that we definitely want to get an idea of the cost. And I think Danny and I had both agreed that really we're not looking for someone to do a financial audit for any type of fraud, that, we have the auditor each year and we always have a good finding on that. So we're not really looking so much, I think, at the list of folks who specialize in fraud kind of investigations. That's not what we think is going on at all, not the reason for the purpose of this at all. And so we've gotten some really good lists. I think it's really important that we get someone who has district finance experience. And so we've gotten a list from Mr. Chenoweth that includes 6 or 7 folks, and any of those folks would be acceptable to me.
So if you guys could weigh in, what I have mentioned to them in just a general discussion is that I absolutely preface with everything that Sherry just said, that this is not anything that we're alleging wrongdoing on anyone's part, just maybe a fresh set of eyes and moving the conversation forward would be a good thing. So if you guys could kind of give me ideas of what you would specifically like them to look at, then I think they can give a better estimate of that will take me 10 hours at XYZ, or that would take me 2 days, or, you know, they need a better scope on the work.
I guess when we first brought this was just to, again, Danny, have an independent look at what our, what is the state of our budget? I know that we've been given information. It does seem conflicting at times, but just to really look at that, and maybe I would like them to look at our expenses, but I understand that that may be beyond the scope of what they can do without really getting into our operations, but maybe just even a little comparison of other districts our size, what kind of expenses they have.
Okay.
What are your thoughts, Danny,
That's,
as far as what's going to be in the scope of this?
I think one thing that I would definitely like is the look at the impact on the district finances on the restricted money. And I agree with what you said. We know we've had some different discussions, and that it would be good to have those things identified.
Okay.
Well, and it sounds like what you're saying, Debbie, is that you'd like someone with district level experience, which is kind of what Danny and I had sort of discussed also.
Right.
And I think the second thing that I just want to clarify is we had a really nice email response from a lady who said that Amy Smith is one of the best, that our district folks with Mr. Hawkins, Ms. Smith are really, excellent resources, and that they, do a very, very good job. So just passing that praise along to you, Amy and Mr. Hawkins.
And I think that we agree with that. I think we just need a fresh eyes and maybe somebody that everybody can talk to. So, Mr. Wilson, do you have anything else you want to add to the scope of this?
Well, I think you had an example in the meeting today. Where I forget who asked Ms. Smith a question about bidding. Who asked that question?
I did.
Okay, you asked the question, and her answer was the fallback answer that we always get. My recommendation is to rescind the BG1. It really didn't answer the question. We have to have somebody that can help us answer those questions from time to time. And to put that in scope, I don't know how you do it, but we have to have someone that we can ask questions to, my opinion.
Well, and maybe, if we want to expand the scope a little bit to cover, Danny, you talked about what the impact of the restriction will have on our budget, but also just maybe expanding it to reviewing the BG1. And I think most people who've had a lot of school district finance experience may be familiar with that. Just like Mr. Wilson said, you know, if we don't want to rescind it, what are some maybe more things that we haven't thought about, or we don't have the knowledge to even think about and ask about specifically surrounding the BG1? So somehow include the scope of this engagement to have some review and help with the BG1.
I think
Mr. Wilkin, or just, because that was the question, was specifically about that.
No, that's all I have, thank you.
How about you, Ms. Richardson? Do you have anything to add?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay.
And Debbie, I would just say, just as a final thought, I think that once we get an idea of the cost, it'll be a lot easier for us to kind of have discussions if we want to move forward with this. But I would really just like to reiterate, Ms. Smith has dozens, I don't know how many years she's been with Woodford, but she was, many years of experience. She also has, multiple certifications, has served as president of her association, of course, received an award within the past few years as the #1 school finance officer in the state, I believe. So I definitely think that Amy knows this budget inside and out. And I feel like she's been very forthcoming, as has Mr. Hawkins, with the consequences of our decisions. And I think we've been given that verbally in multiple meetings and in writing in multiple meetings. And she's been spot on, with her estimates and then what actually happens. So I do have a lot of confidence in her.
Well, I think we all do. I would add one more thing, Danny, and I hope we're giving you specific enough. So make sure you ask questions, you and Sherry, to make sure we're giving you specific enough answers. But one other thing that I think that's come up in the last week or so would be just kind of an analysis of what a flat tax rate would do to us over the next few years and how that would impact our budget.
Okay. Then I will continue reaching out, and Sherry and I will keep communicating and bring you guys back more information at the next meeting.
Thank you both. Thank you both. I know how these break into your day, these kinds of extra things, and I appreciate it. All right, the next item is item F, budget deficits. This was Ms. Springate. I don't think we had any, do we have any documentation that we should be looking at, or?
No, really, it was contingent upon what we did tonight. So since tonight, we did pass the restriction, the $350,000 restriction, I just want to discuss how we'll deal with the budget shortfalls and just make sure that that's something that this board does instead of kind of passing off to the future boards. I think that, that just is the responsible thing to do. Of course, in the June 8th meeting, we voted against unrestricting some of the cash from the BG1 and utilizing that for some capital funds requests. And so I just really feel like we need to have some serious discussions about what the restriction of money, the consequences of that, and what that does to our budget, and the deficits that causes, especially when we're going to be going into really just a very horrible kind of economic situation with the pandemic and with the anticipated cuts that we're going to have in some different funding things. So I just think that's an important thing for us to agree that we will do and then actually do it.
Okay. Well, I think there's quite a few, we were presented a budget with a flat rate. That was the option, and it was, I think as Smith said last week, by unrestricting or choosing not to continue to restrict the 600, that our expenses exceeded our revenues by 2.3 million. So probably be good to look at where that is going to come from. And perhaps she could, with some of these decisions we've made in the last couple of weeks, revise that budget that we have, and that would be a good starting point. She could bring that to us in June. All right, anything else on budget deficits?
You mean, I want to make sure I understand, and I think we need to be clear on this. While it was a recommendation that we had on the flat rate, 4 board members voted for that. So that was not they could have easily not taken our recommendation and voted for the 4% rate. So that wasn't done. And so I do want to be clear about that. And we have presented a budget. You have a budget that has all of the expenditures and things in it with a flat rate. So when you say you want something else brought to you, what is it that you want brought to you?
The thing that Ms. Springate just asked for, which was how we're going to cover those deficits. Now, we know that you're going to bring us $350,000 that's restricted, and maybe some capital outlay. We didn't use 80% of the capital outlay out of general fund, as far as I can tell this year, but that still leaves quite a bit from the budget that you gave us to pass on June 8th. So that's what I would be requesting.
Well, and
I think it's important to say, because we kind of got in this trap last year, we voted on a budget that included a flat tax rate. The majority voted on that. They did not vote on a tax rate.
No, I understand that.
Just like when we vote on a budget that we have to pass in May with a 4% tax rate, that does not obligate us, or in any way should anybody insinuate that by doing that, we have said what our tax rate will be when we officially set it in August or September. So I think it's very important to make that clear to the public, to be transparent about that. Mr. Wilson, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. All
I
right.
did have something, Debbie, that I would like to say, and I think Mr. Hawkins wanted to speak too. What I'd like to say is we have been given the list of discretionary spending that our district has. We have that. We've had it for months and months and months. We've known for 2 years now that spending for this high school, restricting for this high school causes deficits. This is something the board needs to do, and I don't think that Ms. Smith can continue giving us the same documents over and over. We just have to sit down and make some hard decisions. If we choose to spend the money and restrict the money for a high school, then we have to make those same kind of cuts because we don't have money to do both. And so that is something that the board has all the documentation, we have all the lists, we have every expense that we could possibly cut that's discretionary that has been given to us and provided to us. So I feel like this is just something we need to do. And I would make a motion that we that we as a board have a budget deficit or a balanced budget, that we are able to make the cuts to balance this budget because of the funds expended on the high school and the restrictions made for the high school, that we do that's independent of what the tax rate will be, that this is something totally separate and something that we just need to do instead of having on agenda after agenda, month after month. To Ms. Bradley's point, that really does just cause, divisiveness if we're arguing about the same things over and over. We said we would balance this budget. This is year 2 that we're going into, taking money from the general fund, taking money and putting it over on BG1s and on restrictions. And so now we just need to balance that. That's the responsible thing to do.
Sherry, can I interject on that too?
Please.
I would say that I agree completely on balancing the $350,000, but I do think that we need to have another conversation given that the recommendation for the flat tax rate has such a big impact on the proposed budget for next year. I think those are 2 separate conversations, but they definitely are going to we're going to have to figure out how to offset that. And I think that was a bit of a surprise, at least for me, that was Mr. Hawkins and Ms. Smith's recommendation, just looking at historically, and I think Mr. Hawkins has said in meetings before that he always recommends the 4% because, that has gotten us to where we are with the contingency fund that we do have. So I think 2 separate, I agree that we have to figure out the 350, but I also think that we're going to have to figure out the overarching impact of that flat tax if that is what the board chooses to adopt when it comes time to set the rate.
And then Mr. Hawkins,
we're going to possibly hire a financial consultant. I think I would really want to talk to him or her before this. And I would also ask you a question, Mr. Chenoweth, are you here still? Have you
We have two.
Fran?
I bet one of them is.
I heard a sigh, but okay. Never mind then. Mr. Hawkins, did you have something else?
I'm here.
Oh, Grant, would you consider it to be in the statutory and contractual duty of a superintendent to provide a priority list of expense cuts?
The superintendent is the professional advisor to the board. He serves, he owes a duty of, to fulfill that obligation to give you all guidance on, my opinion, on all of the options from amongst those that will be lawful for the board to take. And he can make a recommendation as to which of those options he thinks is the best option, but I believe the guidance that ought to be coming from the professional advisor to the board is not, as you all have discussed before, it shouldn't be a take it or leave it notion of this is my recommendation, and if you don't follow my recommendation, you're on your own from amongst the world of available other options.
Okay, thank you. Mr.
And then
Hawkins?
to be clear, Mr. Wilkins did give us a list of different options. There was option 1, option 2, option 3, and then an entire list of all of the discretionary funds that we could mix and match. But there were 3 distinct separate options, I do believe. Mr. Hawkins, is that correct?
Yeah,
2
well,
or 3?
what I think would be extremely helpful is we've given you probably a more detailed list of expenditures than any district in the state of Kentucky has given a board. And we gave that to you back in February. What I think would be ideal is to sit down and go through that list item by item with the board, and we can have a discussion about each of those items and the importance. For me to say one is more important than another is very, very difficult to do. I think it would be helpful to have that conversation and then make that determination as a collective body. Because ultimately the board has to vote on which ones they want to cut. And so I think having the conversation allows you all to ask questions about any of those expenses, and we can provide any backup. We've tried to provide you a great deal of detail in that list in terms of what all is covered with those costs. And again, the level of detail on expenditures, I've not ever seen that given to anybody else. And so I do think we've gone through a great exercise in that, but I think ultimately it's going to take a conversation about any of those discretionary expenditures.
Okay, so it sounds like we're going to have to schedule that before we could really make any decisions on this agenda item, budget deficit. So,
If I could, Madam Chairperson, I would like to pipe up and just say what the superintendent just told you all, I think is 100% accurate in the sense I've never seen a list like that. I know he and his cabinet spend a significant amount of time breaking down where each expenditure is, whether it's mandatory, discretionary. Some of those things they become mandatory for the board because a SBDM has chosen to pursue a particular curriculum choice or particular instructional practice. The level of detail that I think they did try to provide from the cabinet, I do think it was extraordinary. I've not seen that from any of the other school districts that we represent. I also think the superintendent's right that you all need to have the opportunity in a more conversational work session or to discuss each one of those items to say whether you're getting the bang for your buck.
right.
Whether it's whether you're throwing good money after bad, whether there's an initiative that was good when it started, but now it's just bureaucratic inertia that keeps the program going. So I think that level of honest discussion that might involve some of your school level administrators as well might be appropriate.
Right, and I think that's my point, is that we do need to rely on the advice of our educators to tell us which cuts would have the least effect on the student. I appreciate the itemized thing. I didn't know it was that unusual. I will tell you that people in the community have seen it, also appreciate it. It's a great tool for us to show people when they complain about their taxes. to have specifics to show them where they're going. But Sherry, with your permission, let's just try to set something up a little bit more formal where we can go into some of these things that Mr. Hawkins has suggested this conversation.
Sounds great.
All right, item,
Chairperson,
yes, sir.
Ms. Springate said Mr. Hawkins had something else he wanted to talk about.
Oh, it was a long time ago. I don't know if he still even remembers. Anybody wanted to say something earlier?
Technically, Sherry, I think, can you withdraw your motion? I think you made one.
I'll withdraw.
Okay. Item G, set evaluation criteria and evaluation process to be used for the superintendent evaluation in the year 2021. This is part of our policy. When most of this language comes right out of our policy, I believe it's 3.14. Ms. Bradley's kind of been doing our evaluation stuff, so I'll kind of let her guide the discussion on this. My understanding is that we need to have this done by the end of July, but I thought if we could have a preliminary conversation, we might come up with what we want tonight. If not, at least it gives us another meeting in July to finalize.
I would agree with that. I think that to stay compliant with our policy, we need to just formally say that we're going to use the same assessment tool that we have used. And then I think if any board member has a goal that they would like to add for Mr. Hawkins for the upcoming year, if you could submit those so that we can then have a, first kind of touch base evaluation meeting and go over those with Mr. Hawkins and discuss them together. We'd be ready to do that maybe in an executive session in July. So I guess, Grant, you could probably say, do we need to formally vote to use the same assessment tool?
You should, but I think that should be at a July meeting. The statute,
Okay.
The evaluation statute refers to the first 30 days of the school year, the fiscal year that starts July 1.
Okay, then we will all plan for that at the July planning meeting, Debbie?
Yeah, we can do it right before. Grant, can we do this in executive session? My understanding was tonight that if we're just setting goals, voting on the evaluation process, that we cannot do that in an executive session.
Yeah, it's kind of a hybrid notion of that discussion. The broad notion of setting goals is a public discussion. The broad notion of what instrument is being used, the evaluation tool, the rubric, is a public discussion. But if the discussion is going to be a more personalized discussion with the superintendent as to the preliminary discussion of here's something that we specific that you did, there's not a good example I can use. It's kind of the generic one that we use because we don't have a superintendent that does it. You spend an awful lot of time at the racetrack, and that really looks bad for the school district. So could you spend a little bit more time in the district and less time down the road at the racetrack? If there's that kind of personalized, hey, you used to do this, and we'd like you to knock that off because it looks bad for us, that's a closed session discussion. It's a preliminary discussion relating to the specific performance of the superintendent, as opposed to the broad discussion of the goals and the instrument that's being used for the evaluation. Does that distinction make sense to all the board members?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's fine.
Just a couple of things, and Grant, thanks for clarifying first that I don't go to the racetrack all the time. And I certainly appreciate that. I wouldn't want anybody to think that was me.
I have to use something absurd to make sure it doesn't apply to any of the clients that we know.
Okay.
I don't know, some things are never too absurd.
Right.
Not Mr. Hopkins, so yeah.
The second thing is that just a reminder that the goals really should be district goals. And so it's not necessarily just something that you want me to do, because that should be covered in the evaluation instrument, but they're goals for the district as a whole. But the other thing that I would ask for, I provided a great amount of evidence this past year in my evaluation. In 2019, I was scored a 4 in 3 areas. I went down in in three of those, in all three of those, plus I was rated a 3 and then a 2. I would ask, and I received no feedback with those ratings. I would ask that the board have for me in writing what exemplary looks like, what you would expect me to do in order to be exemplary, based on the work inside the district. And, because again, in my evaluation this year, it was, here are your scores and that's it. And I think that should be, I want the opportunity to improve, but in order to get to exemplary, I need to know what it is. And I need to know what that expectation is.
And so I would say on that, I think that those are pretty much spelled out in the definitions for the assessment. Exemplary is exceeds the standard.
Mm-hmm.
Are you asking that we do how it would exceed the standard in Woodford County?
Well, I guess if you would then just look at my evidence and tell me then what exceeding the standard would look like.
Okay.
So actually look at what I submitted and tell me if that doesn't exceed the standard, what does.
Okay.
Because I think that needs to be clearly identified, because my goal is to get better, but I need to know what it is, what it looks like for me to get there.
Sure.
So Grant, I'm sorry, Danny. Grant, a discussion that Mr. Hawkins is describing here, would that be an executive session? Because that's really kind of personal to him, so that would be appropriate for an executive session?
I think so. If you're tying that discussion back to last year's evaluation and what you would want to see for the scores to improve on this year's evaluation, I do think that is the type of preliminary discussion that the statute says shall be in closed session.
Okay.
Not just may, but shall.
So some of this might be happening in public and an executive. Okay, I just want to make sure that we know when we can go in executive session. Okay. Anything else?
Miss, even before you went to the evaluation, we were talking about the budget and having a work session where the superintendent and we would collaborate. Mr. Hawkins, will you explain that again?
I'd like to be able to sit down with the list that was provided and we can go through it.
No, I'm back to the budget,
That is the budget.
Okay, go ahead.
Go through it. We can go through every discretionary expense and we can talk through and make a determination if that needs to be eliminated or if it needs to be kept in order to achieve the level of deficit that we will be looking at going into next year. And so that would be, I think, a worthwhile exercise to be able to go through all of that.
Because you said something about it would be difficult for you to make that decision on your own, and it would be better if we made those decisions in partnership.
Well, I'm just saying it would be a very narrow lens in terms of trying to prioritize a list of, and I don't know what the amount might end up being for next year,
Okay.
but I think that it would be my district staff and I looking at that, and how we determine a level of importance may be different than the way you look at it from a level of importance. And I think that conversation would be helpful in terms of determining what needs to be cut.
I agree with you. When are we going to have that same conversation about the COVID-19 funds? When are we going to sit down and collaboratively talk about the expenditure of CARES funding, state funding, FEMA funding, where we can talk about the pros and the cons, about supporting our students and staff?
Really,
we're going to have that conversation.
Actually, what we're doing, I mean, that's really just day-to-day operations. We've got a budget for the CARES money, and we have a list of what are eligible expenses, and those things that we are purchasing for the opening of school, we are utilizing those funds. we are discussing how we could utilize FEMA in a way. That one's a little bit more unique because it's a reimbursement. So we're out the money up front. And so you want to be strategic with that. Is it something that you can afford to pay for now and then wait several months for a potential reimbursement? But just getting ready for school, purchasing water bottle fillers and purchasing PPE and those types of things, those are just day-to-day operations that we are performing as we go through and prepare for the beginning of school.
Let me be sure to see if I understand what you're saying. The CARES money, the allocation of those funds, it's not a board decision?
I don't, if you want to make every decision about what we purchase before the beginning of school, we would have to meet almost daily.
It's not I just asked you if it was a board
I see
decision
that,
or not.
I see that as that we were given a budget of money, and our job is to expend that. And so that's the way I view it. And if you all view it differently, and you want to approve every expense that we are, I know if there was a major purchase, let's say we were going to buy 300 Chromebooks, and we wanted to use CARES money. That obviously would be something very unique and different, and we would come to the board and we would say, do you want to expend that much money, that much of the CARES money for that particular thing? But to buy PPE equipment, we just think that's a necessary thing. The money can be spent on that. Let's go ahead and get it ordered so we can get it here in time. When we're ordering thermometers, we need to get those in on time. So we've already placed the order. We've already utilized CARES money. Again, to me, those are day-to-day operations as we prepare to begin the school year.
I think we're a little bit off our agenda here. I do think the whole back to school, COVID, CARES money, I was surprised to be copied on an email this week that told me the task force is only working on curriculum. I'm not really sure who's working on the reentry, but these are all things that aren't on the agenda tonight that really, really warrant a big discussion and an open one, so the whole public can listen. So that I think we're getting a little bit off our agenda item. This is something that we're going to have to set. School's scheduled to start 6 weeks from today. Our next regular meeting, I don't believe, is until July 23rd. Am I right? So this will be another meeting that we're going to have to get into.
And that's we just received the final guidance from the Department of Health today.
Right.
And we are preparing documents that we will be sending out to you. I sent you a calendar option this afternoon for review.
So I'm saying, Scott, is we're getting off our agenda a little bit. So I want to be.
I know, but I'm saying there is no doubt we will need a meeting in probably the first week of July. One thought is you could have it before the forum date. If you wanted to avoid another meeting, that's an option. We could do something else maybe that week, but we want to go through what we're looking at from a reentry standpoint, because we've got to start getting feedback from parents. I'd love, after we talk about the reentry plans, if you all want to do something with the calendar, I'd love to do a virtual town hall and be able to have our administrators here so we can explain what things are going to look like, take questions and those types of things.
Okay. Well, I mean, why don't you email out if you guys are ready to do this next week? We could do it next week. So let's just get something on the books sooner. Look at it, see when you're going to be ready, and we'll get something set up. Okay.
Okay. The documents that we're working on are it's going to be early next week. But that was my fear about trying to set something up for next week and looking at the following week.
That's fine. That's fine. Whenever you're ready, because we don't want to do something if we're not going to have everything.
Right.
So we'll get that on the books. All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
I believe Mr. Crafty and Ms. Springate seconded it. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Hi.
Okay, motion passes, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Leave.
The little phone.